Maps tell a story of ambition and defiance, of borders erased in smoke and redrawn with blood. In Ukraine, every mile lost is a family uprooted, a flag lowered, a future rewritten. Russia's control of roughly 20% of Ukraine's territory is one of the most defining and consequential realities of the ongoing conflict. This figure is not simply a geographic measurement, it represents a vast swath of land stretching from the eastern Donbas region to the southern coastline, including areas of Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. These territories are rich in natural resources, industrial infrastructure, and agricultural output, making them economically significant for both Ukraine and Russia. Control over these areas also provides Moscow with crucial military advantages, including fortified positions, access to supply lines from Russian territory, and strategic depth in defending occupied zones. The occupation has transformed these regions into heavily militarized zones, with constant fortification efforts, minefields, and artillery emplacements. The 20% figure also represents a profound humanitarian impact. Millions of Ukrainians who once lived under Kyiv's governance now find themselves under Russian control, facing restrictions on free expression, changes in administration, the imposition of Russian laws, currency, and media. Many have fled, adding to Ukraine's refugee crisis, while those who remain often contend with shortages of goods, disrupted education systems, and limited access to healthcare. These occupied territories have also become the front lines of propaganda battles as Russia works to solidify its hold not only through military presence, but also through efforts to shift local loyalties, whether by coercion or inducement. From a strategic perspective, the 20% figure underscores the scale of Ukraine's challenge in reclaiming its land. Retaking such an expanse requires immense manpower, sustained international support, and advanced weaponry capable of overcoming well-entrenched defenses. It also reflects the shift from the early months of the war, rapid territorial changes were common, to a more static, attritional conflict where front lines have hardened and progress is measured in meters rather than miles. For Russia, holding this territory is central to its narrative of success and to its bargaining position in any future negotiations, as relinquishing land would be seen domestically as a defeat. The international community views Russia's occupation of 20% of Ukraine's territory as a direct challenge to the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity enshrined in the post-World II global order, has fueled unprecedented sanctions, reshaped NATO's posture in Eastern Europe, and altered global energy and grain markets. The number itself, 20%, can mask the human suffering, the economic dislocation, and the cultural erasure taking place on the ground. It is a statistic that speaks to the sheer scale of the war, but cannot capture the full weight of its consequences, which ripple far beyond Ukraine's borders into the very fabric of international stability. Moscow's objective of achieving full control over 4 eastern and southern regions of Ukraine, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, reflects both its strategic military goals and its broader political ambitions. These territories form a geographic arc that would link Russia's own borders directly to the Crimean Peninsula, which it annexed in 2014. By holding all of these regions, Russia would secure an uninterrupted land corridor along the Sea of Azov and much of the Black Sea coast, providing a critical route for moving troops, equipment, and resources. This access would also strengthen Russia's naval presence and its ability to project power across the region, further complicating Ukraine's ability to maintain maritime trade routes vital for its economy. The regions in question are not only strategically positioned, but also economically valuable, containing key industrial hubs, mineral resources, fertile farmland that produce grain and other exports essential for Ukraine's economy and global food markets. The pursuit of complete control over these 4 regions is also tied to Russia's political narrative. By declaring these territories as part of Russia following widely denounced referendums in 2022, Moscow has attempted to legitimize its claim domestically and internationally, framing the conflict as a defense of new Russian lands. In reality, these areas remain heavily contested, with Ukrainian forces still operating in parts of them and launching counteroffensives to regain lost ground. The Kremlin's insistence on their full capture indicates that any potential ceasefire or negotiated settlement that does not deliver complete territorial control would be seen as unacceptable from its standpoint for Ukraine. Conceding these regions would mean not only a severe territorial loss, but also the displacement of millions of its citizens and the forfeiture of strategically vital positions. The battle for these territories has been among the most intense and destructive of the war. Cities such as Mariupol, Severodonetsk, and Melitopol have endured sieges, mass evacuations, widespread infrastructure destruction. The civilian population has faced occupation policies that include forced Russification, suppression of Ukrainian culture, the replacement of local governance with Russian-appointed administrations. For the Kremlin, consolidating control over these regions would allow it to claim a tangible victory and potentially freeze the conflict on terms favorable to its long-term regional influence. For Kiev and its allies, preventing such consolidation is essential to preserving Ukraine's sovereignty, ensuring its access to critical coastlines, maintaining the principle that borders cannot be redrawn through military force. The ongoing struggle over these four regions thus lies at the heart of the war's strategic, political, and moral stakes. The meeting between former U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin carries a weight far beyond the realm of polite diplomatic exchange. In international politics, personal interactions between leaders can influence perceptions, shape agendas, and even alter the trajectory of conflicts. In this case, the war in Ukraine forms an unavoidable backdrop, infusing every aspect of the encounter with geopolitical tension. The symbolism alone is powerful. Two figures with a history of complex and controversial interactions sitting down while Europe's largest land war since World War II grinds on. This is not a meeting in a vacuum, but one that will be interpreted through the lens of current events, alliances, and the balance of power. For Russia, the optics of meeting a former U.S. president could serve as a form of political validation, a signal to domestic and international audiences that it remains an indispensable player in global affairs despite sanctions and diplomatic isolation. For Trump, the meeting offers both opportunities and risks. His political brand has long included a claim of being able to strike deals others cannot. Engagement with Putin could be framed as an attempt at dialogue in a fractured world. Yet any perceived friendliness toward Moscow, especially in the context of Russia's ongoing aggression, risks being interpreted as undermining U.S. commitments to its allies and the principles of territorial integrity. The high-profile nature of such a meeting means that every handshake, glance, and turn of phrase will be scrutinized by the media and political observers. Even the absence of certain topics from discussion could be as telling as the presence of others. Analysts will be looking for subtle cues, whether Ukraine is discussed in concrete terms, whether there is talk of sanctions relief, or whether the conversation drifts toward more abstract notions of peace, without addressing the realities on the ground. In diplomatic theater, subtext often carries as much weight as the spoken word. Moreover, this encounter will take place in a world where trust between the West and Russia is at its lowest point in decades. NATO expansion, economic sanctions, cyber operations, and proxy conflicts all form a charged environment in which even a brief meeting can reverberate globally. For Ukraine, the prospect of such a dialogue could raise concerns about decisions being made over its future without its direct participation. For Washington's allies, the meeting will be watched closely for signs of policy direction or shifts in U.S.-Russia relations. The historical context, the current stakes, the personalities involved ensure that the meeting will be more than just a headline. It will be an event laden with meaning, shaping narratives long after the doors close. The possibility of unspoken agendas at a meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin is almost inevitable, given the stakes and the political histories of both men. Official statements, press conferences, and public readouts tend to focus on agreed talking points, carefully crafted to convey a particular image. What happens behind closed doors is often far more consequential. In the context of the war in Ukraine, These private exchanges could touch on matters that neither side is eager to broadcast. Whether it's potential concessions, shifts in negotiating positions, or informal understandings about military and economic pressures. The nature of high-level diplomacy often involves exploring possibilities that cannot be openly acknowledged without triggering political backlash, both domestically and internationally. One area where unspoken agendas may surface is the question of territorial control. While public rhetoric from most Western leaders emphasizes Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, any off-the-record discussion between Trump and Putin could, in theory, broach the idea of freezing the conflict along current front lines or trading sanctions relief for certain compromises. For Putin, such dialogue, especially with a prominent American political figure, could be a way to test the waters for a settlement on terms favorable to Moscow, gauging how much resistance there might be to proposals that deviate from Kiev's stated aims. For Trump, private exploration of alternative outcomes might be framed as a pragmatic search for an end to the war, though it would inevitably raise questions about the cost of peace if it comes at Ukraine's expense. Unspoken agendas might also involve matters far beyond Ukraine itself. The meeting could serve as an opportunity for both men to discuss broader U.S.-Russia relations, from arms control issues to regional influence in the Middle East, energy policy, or even the shifting alignments in global trade. The interconnectedness of these issues means that a concession in one area could be tied to an advantage in another, creating a diplomatic trade-off that might never appear in official statements. This is why meetings between high-profile political figures are rarely just about the headline topic. Such quiet, unofficial discussions carry both risks and potential benefits. They allow for more candid exchanges, free from the constraints of public posturing, but they also invite suspicion. Allies of the United States may wonder whether commitments are being made in private that could affect their security interests, while domestic critics may question the transparency and accountability of the process. In a conflict as deeply consequential as the war in Ukraine, the mere perception that deals could be discussed without Kiev's direct involvement is enough to generate unease, making the management of these unspoken agendas as politically sensitive as the public diplomacy surrounding the meeting. Ukraine's perspective in the ongoing war is shaped by an acute awareness that its very existence as an independent nation is at stake. For Kiev, the conflict is not merely about disputed borders or contested territories. It is about the preservation of sovereignty, national identity, and the right to determine its own future. The loss of any portion of its internationally recognized territory is seen as a dangerous precedent that could invite further aggression, not only from Russia, but from other actors who might view the redrawing of borders by force as an acceptable strategy. This existential view drives Ukraine's refusal to accept any settlement that involves conceding land, no matter the pressure from foreign capitals or the toll of the fighting. The war has also deeply embedded itself into Ukraine's political and social fabric. Cities under bombardment, communities uprooted, millions displaced have created a shared national experience of resistance. The government's position reflects not just a political calculation, but a mandate from its citizens, who have endured years of hardship and sacrifice in defense of the country's independence. Public opinion in Ukraine overwhelmingly rejects any compromise that leaves occupied territories in Russian hands, reinforcing the leadership's stance in international negotiations. For many Ukrainians, the fight is not just about reclaiming land, but about rejecting a future in which they live under the control of a government that denies their culture, language, historical narrative. Ukraine's caution toward external negotiations stems from historical experience. From its perspective, deals brokered without its direct participation have often failed to secure lasting peace or protect its interests. The memory of the 2014 annexation of Crimea, followed by the war in Donbass despite international agreements, informs a deep skepticism toward promises from Moscow. This wariness extends to any meeting between global figures, such as a Trump-Putin dialogue, where the possibility exists that compromises could be discussed in Ukraine's absence. For Kiev, Even the perception that its fate might be decided elsewhere is unacceptable, as it undermines the principle of self-determination and risks weakening its diplomatic leverage. On the battlefield, Ukraine's commitment to defending its territory is matched by its diplomatic push to maintain international support. The country understands that the continuation of military aid, economic assistance, sanctions against Russia depends on sustaining the moral and political argument that it is fighting a defensive war against an unprovoked invasion. This framing reinforces the idea that yielding territory would not only be a betrayal of national values, but also a blow to the international rules-based order. In Kiev's view, holding firm is essential because the moment it accepts the permanent loss of land, it risks signaling to the world and to Russia that force can rewrite borders without consequence. The stakes in the war between Russia and Ukraine are measured not only in abstract political terms, but in the physical realities of occupied land, disrupted lives, cultural transformation under foreign control. Every mile of territory seized by Russian forces represents a tangible shift in the country's sovereignty and a concrete loss for its people. Towns and cities that once operated under Ukrainian governance have been absorbed into an administrative and political framework imposed by Moscow, often accompanied by the removal of Ukrainian symbols, the renaming of streets, and the rewriting of local laws. This process of erasing the visible markers of Ukrainian identity is as much a part of the occupation as the deployment of troops and the construction of defensive lines. In these occupied areas, daily life has been reshaped in ways that extend beyond the battlefield. Residents are subject to restrictions on movement, media, and assembly, while education systems are restructured to reflect Russian curricula. Currency is switched to the ruble, and public services are reorganized under Russian oversight. For many, access to food, medicine, and employment has become more precarious, especially in places where the fighting has destroyed infrastructure. The human cost is evident in the waves of refugees and internally displaced persons who have fled the occupied zones, leaving behind homes, businesses, communities that may never be restored to their pre-war state. Economically, these losses ripple far beyond the occupied regions. Many of the areas under Russian control are agriculturally rich and industrially important, contributing significantly to Ukraine's grain exports, mining sector, manufacturing base. The seizure of these assets not only deprives Ukraine of critical revenue, but also grants Russia greater leverage in global commodity markets, especially in the trade of grain and energy resources. This economic disruption feeds into a broader geopolitical struggle, as the effects are felt in regions dependent on Ukrainian exports from North Africa to the Middle East. Culturally and psychologically, the stakes are equally profound. For Ukrainians, reoccupied city is a reminder of the fragility of their independence and the cost of defending it. Stories of forced deportations, censorship, intimidation foster a climate of fear, but also strengthen a sense of resilience among those resisting occupation, whether openly or in quieter acts of defiance. For the international community, these occupied territories are not just disputed lands. They are symbols of a global challenge to the principle that borders cannot be redrawn through force. The struggle over them is therefore more than a military campaign. It is a test of political will, international solidarity, and the belief that the rights of nations, both large and small, can be defended against coercion. As the world watches the calculated theater of diplomacy, the reality on the ground in Ukraine remains unchanged. A nation fights for every inch of its sovereignty while an aggressor seeks to cement its gains. Any meeting, handshake, or closed-door promise will mean little if it ignores the simple truth that peace, built on the surrender of freedom, is no peace at all.